Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to walk you through how I annotate a poem. Now, typically, if I'm annotating a poem, I'm just trying to make sense of it initially. If in the end it turns out that I'm going to write an essay about a particular poem, then I print out a fresh copy and I make very specific annotations that relate to the topic of my essay. So just keep that in mind when you're working on your poetry essay. Okay, so I know there's a lot going on. Some may even argue this is a hot mess, but of course, as most annotations, it makes sense to me because I'm the one that did them. And of course, I love poetry, so I get a little carried away when I'm annotating, obviously. Such a dork sometimes. Anyway, so first thing I want to highlight is that you'll notice that I've circled and underlined a whole bunch of things here. I've even put brackets. And sometimes I just go through a poem and I do all of these types of marks first. So I'll just, as I'm reading, I'll just decide to circle naked and us and underline these things. Not really trying to make sense of them, but just marking them because they initially stand out. And then I go back and I put in comments like this or ask questions. So if you're more comfortable doing it that way, by all means do that. If you'd rather mark things and then comment on them as you go along, that's okay too. It's really, the whole point is for you to just make sure that you annotate. Okay, so in this case, I circled naked, and then over here, I write down multiple connotations, right, that have to do with the word, right? Innocence, something unusual, lack of resources, just so I can start to brainstorm about the multiple meanings behind certain words, right? And then here I've circled us because to me the use of the first person plural is kind of interesting. I figure at this point they're trying to make a more universal message, right? I'm grouped with the speaker of the poem. Okay. And then here I've underlined her arms stretched out because normally when you think about that, somebody is coming to get a hug when they stretch their arms out, possibly. That's one possible association, right? But in this case, it's the opposite of what normally happens, right? Her arms are stretched out, but she's basically running towards the camera, not necessarily a person. Now, you may look at the photograph and think that actually she is running towards someone, and there's room for interpretation, of course, but you just want to make sure whatever you talk about is rooted in the language and the devices being used, right? So as long as you have text to back up the point, that's what matters. Okay. So in this case, unlike here where I asked a question, the world turned to trash behind her, I just wrote down an impression. So it doesn't always have to be you analyzing something. It can just be you reacting to the poem. Okay, and then down here, I have circled, you'll notice I've circled some S's and some D's, right? And then the repetition of B and U sounds. I'm just doing that to get a feel for sound patterns that are occurring in the poem. Now, I may or may not use that ultimately in my paper, but it helps me better understand the role of sound in the larger piece. Okay? And, I'm also trying to look at the relationship between things. So the fact that the smoke is being caused by the soldiers, right? Okay, if you scroll down further, I do mark the lost family members. Such a sad poem. I don't know why I chose this poem. I mean, it's so powerful, but it's depressing. So I apologize if I'm depressing you. Okay. So then here, blown up bamboo hut, I've underlined it, and I said a type of explosion, blown up and melting. And I've tried to look at how the words relate to one another, right? And the idea that it's, both the earth and these physical objects are being disintegrated if that's the right word for it. Okay. So here, and she's also running from the gods. I marked that because there's a difference between saying the gods and a god, right? So here I've put multiple interpretations. 1, a powerful entity. 2, spiritual reference indicating location. 3, mythology. 4, as a child she may have fantastical notions of what's going on. And then gods as inevitability. So I'm just writing down whatever comes to mind. And just because you write it doesn't mean that you have to use it ultimately or that it's right. I think the one thing about annotating a poem is it's better to get it on the page, and then you can decide what comments you've made are relevant and what ones aren't. Okay. So then here, I circled my, right? Because I'm always fascinated in poems by the little words, right? Because those little words really carry a lot of meaning. So in this case, I just put that it has religious associations, right? And that it's being used for emphasis. I also love that to some extent, I hate it when I look back at annotations and I'm like, what's the Western religious associations for? So sometimes you can look back at your own annotations and kind of wonder why you put it there. But, it's there, so be it. Okay. So here you can start to see all over the country we're feeling sorry. So there's this definite shift that occurs in the poem, right? And so the other thing you can do is mark structural shifts in what's being talked about. So, before it's talking about what's occurring in the photograph, and then down here it starts to talk about what's going on over here, right? All of this emphasizing the separation of the East and West. Okay. And then as you're moving towards the end of the poem, you can also mark different elements of punctuation. So in this case, the use of 2 questions, right, is supposed to elicit a reaction from the poem's audience, right? And then down here, 2 questions and then a conclusive statement, right, which is the questions and then followed by a statement that kind of adds power to the statement itself. So you can see there's a variety of types of comments. Now in this case I've decided to color code them, right? Orange having to do with punctuation, the red usually has to do with grammatical marks, the green has to do with sound, and then the blue has to do with word choice and interpretation. Okay. So I hope that this has helped you, and be sure and annotate the poem. Well, I would annotate all of the poems, but I would definitely make sure you annotate the poem that you plan on writing essay number 2 about.